Good evening. The San Dimas City Council meeting for Tuesday, January 9th will come to order. Please rise and repeat after me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The entire City Council is present. We'll move into oral communications. Members of the audience are invited to address the City Council on any item on this agenda or not on this agenda. Public comment will be not taken during each individual item except for public hearing items. Comments on public hearing items will be heard when that item is scheduled for discussion. Under the provisions of the Brown Act, the legislative body is prohibited from engaging in discussion on any item not appearing on the posted agenda. However, your concerns may be referred to a staff or set for a discussion at a later date. Each speaker will be limited to speaking once for up to 3 minutes. Do we have any speaker cards?
Margie Green with the Historical Society.
Good evening, Mayor and City Council, and all you other people that are here tonight. Thank you so much. I'm glad we're here getting through the holidays and all. The San Dimas Historical Society has been open and busy during the holidays, and I'd like to remind you we're going to start up next month having our walking tours. We're located in the Walker House, 121 North San Dimas Avenue, along with the great restaurant Vincenzo's. We've been having such good luck with them. Our hours are going to be museum, gift shop, and the office are open on Tuesday and Thursday during the lunch hour for Vincenzo's. And if you have anything you'd like to look up, that's a good time because the offices will be open, as well as the museum and the gift shop. And that's Tuesday and Thursday, noon to 3. The museum and gift shop are open on Friday and Saturday night. We've been having a great time meeting new people and enjoying the neighborhood people that have seen the house for years and never come through it. Are coming through and having dinner at the restaurant and coming upstairs. They'll send everybody upstairs that's waiting for a table, or those that have already eaten can come upstairs. And that's Friday and Saturday night from 6 to 9. We're really happy about that. We also are going to be starting next month, not this Saturday, but next Saturday in the second Saturday in every month from now on. We'll be doing the walking tour of the downtown. And if it rains, we've come up with a great idea. If it rains, we're still going to have a walking tour. We're just going to stay inside the house and give you history and walk you around the house and show you the museum, gift shop, and all of that. So just remember the second Saturday of every month, from 10 to 1, we're going to have somebody there that's going to either take you on the walking tour, and we would like it if you would call and let us know if you're coming for the walking tour. David Harbin is the one that does the walking tour, and if nobody's coming, he probably won't either. But the rest of us will be there, and we'll be glad to give you a tour of the house and the history of the house. The walking tour gives you the history of the downtown area, and it's quite informative. David is third generation San Dimas, and he's got great stories on that. So just remember to come see us in the Walker House, 121 North San Dimas Avenue, and we do have a restaurant in there and a lot to tell you about. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Sylvia Melendez.
Sylvia?
Hi, everyone. My name is Sylvia Melendez. I'm with the San Dimas Chamber of Commerce. I wanted to highlight 2 upcoming events to put on your calendar. This Thursday, January 11th, at 4:30, we're going to have a really great ribbon cutting. It's going to be with Nick the Greek and Subway. They're located at 1045 West Arrow Highway in the Smart and Final Shopping Center. Make sure to come. They're going to give away a lot of goodies and free food, so it's going to be really fun. Make sure to come out. And then we also have the Meet the Candidates Forum coming up on Wednesday, January 31st from 6:30 to 8:30. It will take place at the Stanley Plumber Building, located at 245 East Bonita Avenue in San Dimas. Our moderator will be Brett Strauss from South End Data Processing, so make sure to put that on your calendar as well. We have a full calendar of events this month. For details, go ahead and visit sandimaschamber.com. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Raymond Foster.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, City Council members, staff, and audience. Hey, so a couple of things. First, next week is going to be the Chamber Mixer is sponsored by the 2026 committee. It'll be at the High Point Brewing Company at 5 o'clock on Thursday from 5 to 8, and we'll have some food, and of course there's drinks at being a brewery and all. And so you can meet some of the committee members and talk to us about what's going on. Also, now, if you don't know who is the longest living signer of the Declaration of Independence, you can go to the sandimas2026.com, go to the frequently asked questions section, and there's a whole history of things, or flop over to the blog their site, and there's probably 20 blog entries now on different aspects of the Declaration of Independence, and like the U.S. Air Force, what did they do in 1976 to celebrate the 200th anniversary? These kinds of questions are answered on that website. Also coming up in March is Feeding Military Heroes. On March 9th, we'll be collecting food again. Thus far, the city of San Dimas has sent 13 tons of food to 29 Palms, but we are expanding it now to not only include 29 Palms Marine Corps Base, but also Camp Pendleton. And so the target is 6 tons this March, for a ton to go to Pendleton, and for 5 tons we'll take out to 29 Palms. If we can pull this off, and I think we can, in September we'll expand it to Fort Irwin. And so the city of San Dimas will be feeding military families on 3 major military bases on the West Coast, and I think that's pretty cool. So that's what we got coming up. We got the mixer next week and the Feeding Heroes on March 9th. Thank you very much, and Happy New Year.
Those are all the speaker cards, Mayor.
Thank you. Anyone wishing to speak to the council at this time? Seeing none, we'll move forward with the consent calendar. All items on the consent calendar are considered to be routine and will be enacted by one motion unless a member of the city council requests a separate discussion.
Mr. Mayor, I move approval of the consent calendar.
Second.
Any questions? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing none, motion carries 5-0. Okay, we'll move to other business. Consideration of acceptance of a donation. City Manager Chris Constantine.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Back about a month and a half ago, the city received an unsolicited donation from the Only the Bible Ministry of San Dimas in the amount of $2,000 with a request that we put that money towards those that have most need. And so in terms of the city's operation, we don't currently have a comprehensive policy on accepting donations. And so we're bringing it forth to council for your approval with the restriction that the money be given to the housing division to add to its current programming that serve very low income to low to moderate income, especially those that are seniors at our mobile home park and the Monte Vista senior apartments. And secondly, we're asking whether you want to direct city staff to develop a comprehensive policy on donations and how we receive them, process them, and potentially even determining a criteria at what point do you want some of these approved administratively versus coming to the council. For example, if we receive $1,000 to go towards our seniors, do you want every donation coming to the council with a staff report for that acceptance, or do you want to have some kind of criteria that we can accept those donations, provide a letter that provides the tax benefits back to those individuals who made the donations, and we just document the record of that donation. So with that, I'll leave it to you, Mr. Mayor.
Questions?
I have one. So you mentioned that it's a pretty rare, incident when we have a donation from a organization to the city. Are there any other examples within the past several years where this has happened, or is this really a single standalone?
We have received donations at the parks level, but smaller dollar amounts, very small dollar amounts. And so
Dollar
I
amounts
think,
like in the hundreds and like below 100?
I don't have the exact numbers. They're small, they're event-specific, purpose-specific. But I think we need, as a city, to have just a comprehensive policy that defines, how do we process that? Does it require council approval? How do we account for it? And how do we document the tax benefit to the individual providing that?
And in those other instances that you had mentioned, you said it was for the Parks and Rec Department in those cases, okay. I would state that I would be in favor of a policy, a comprehensive policy, perhaps with a dollar amount over 500, where it would come to council. I think that something below 500, 100 probably can be managed by the city manager. So that would be my preference in terms of weighing in.
And Eric, just a question on that, coming to council, what do you think about it being on the consent calendar as opposed to an agenda item? Do you have a preference? Do you like it?
Given that it's so rare, it would be just, because sometimes you can look at the consent calendar and you don't have the explanation and the report from the city manager. And if something is over 500, we'd probably want to have it called out and discuss it as a group.
I think that's a good opportunity as well to perhaps acknowledge the donation and thank them for it, provide them with, a picture opportunity or something like that with the council.
I'm definitely supportive of a discussion about the policy. I think that is something that needs to be done. I would just add that this isn't, from my experience, a new practice in the city. In fact, the art in here has been a donation, an in-kind donation. There's lots of donations that the city has received. I think we've just not called out a policy as it relates to the monetary establishment of a criteria. I'm all good with pursuing this as staff's recommended with this particular donation. And I want to thank Mr. Cazares, who actually brought it to my attention and sent me some information regarding this. And I think the rest of council. But I do think, I think as it relates to consent calendar and all that, I think that's a thing we can hash out in a policy discussion regarding this, because I think there are certain types of donors that the city may or may not feel comfortable accepting funds from. And I know for law enforcement, for example, I know our sheriff's department has a policy as it relates to this type of activity. And that may be something for us to have in a separate policy discussion. But this particular organization, I have no issue with, and think the use is appropriate and well thought, and support it.
Yeah, and to piggyback on that, I agree the policy discussion is important. I think it's okay to give staff the go-ahead to develop the outlines of a policy and bring it back for discussion, so we're not just, tossing out ideas. But I'll toss out a couple right now, just so before, because I haven't started writing it yet. There obviously have to be, first of all, the sheriff's department, that might be a good place to start, get their policy and see what that entails, because there might be a lot of, maybe just like that. The criteria of what kind of organization it is it just individuals? Is it anybody? Does it have to be a 501(c) or a C3 or C4, one of those types of organizations? So those are questions, and it might be a good idea to have that kind of criteria or something along those lines, about what types of organizations. The other thing that I was just interested in, and we'll have to discuss, is to what extent can the donor put conditions or direct where the money can be used? Chris mentioned Parks and Rec. You obviously mentioned the artwork from the festival, and this one's doing, I think the church wanted it to go to those who are less fortunate, or words to that effect, which is great. But could somebody come in and say, oh, I want this to go toward filling potholes, or, and then we'd be restricted in that way. So anyway.
If I may, we haven't fully thought through what the policy would look like, what elements of it, but the education system receives donations all the time, and so they have policies, and I think we want to frame this a little more probably along the lines of the recognition policy. We don't quite know who's going to come, when they're going to come, the reasonableness of that, and the primary goal is if we accept a donation formally, there's a tax deduction because as a governmental agency that goes to the individuals. And then there's the accountability. If somebody gives us $150 grants and and the $50 are each restricted for all these different things, the cost of the grant might be in excess of the dollar amount we receive for the benefit. And we also want to avoid that administrative cost that's far in excess of the benefit. I don't expect this to blow up and we start receiving millions of dollars, but I want to be prepared in the case that we start moving in the direction where when people want to put money towards goodwill and they want it to be a tax-deductible goodwill, that we have opportunities for them to donate to purposes that the city furthers and be able to get that tax benefit.
I would just, along the lines of what John's talking about, some people donate for causes. Just in my experience, I'm not sure that we can tell a donor not to restrict a donation to a specific cause in my experience, but maybe I'm wrong. I'd like, when we have this discussion, to have a clear understanding, or at least an analysis done on what is a donation to the city, and what are those examples of those types of things, versus what is something that's donated to a cause that might appear to be the city, but in fact is sponsored by another organization. I bring that up because Holiday Extravaganza, as an example, there are things that are being done in coordination with the chamber and with other organizations that may be supportive of the effort, but is not a donation to the city. That's being done another way. So I just want to make sure that we're very clear on what constitutes a donation to the city organization versus somewhere else. And with that, I would move that we accept the donation as proposed, and then direct staff to schedule a study session to a time uncertain when they are prepared to discuss this further, related to the policy governing the acceptance of donations.
Second.
Any further discussion? I just want to take a moment to speak to, it appears that we're saying that this is a tad uncommon for these type of contributions. As was brought up by Ryan, artwork. We have lots and lots of artwork in this building as well as in the Walker House that was donated by the festival. And a lot of us don't want to see that artwork disappeared, but it's the way it has been done recently, or not recently, but in long term. Somebody would call, somebody would offer, and somebody would say yes. And it never really got to the council. I can think of one thing is, if we all go to our parks, we can look in every park we have in the city, and we can see owl houses. Now, I don't think nothing about an owl and a house and all this other stuff, but someone did call and say, we need owl houses in our parks. And they, in fact, did donate money and to have these owl houses put out there. It was $1,000, $2,000, I'm not sure, but I just remember there was no real discussion on where we're going to take the owl houses, but we do have them in all our parks. So I think this is a very good time for us to come up with this policy. I think it's something that we really have been lax and not really thinking about. And I thank the staff for recognizing that, because I happened to be in the room when somebody walked in and said, hey, we got this $2,000 check. What are we going to do with it? And it was brought up, we don't have a policy. So thanks, staff, for looking at that. And at this point, I will, any further discussion?
I'll just say, I remember when I was younger, Carol and the dog park and the Friends of the Dog Park and the meetings and the donations, people have done some amazing things in our city with their own equity to further the community. So I think this is just a formality more than anything else. But
I agree. I agree. All in favor?
aye.
Opposed? Hearing none, motion carries 5-0. And a very special thank you to Only the Bible Church. Okay, we'll move on to introduce ordinance 1303, approving Municipal Code Text Amendment 22-0006 to regulate the use of transit facilities and to determination of exempt from CEQA under CEQA Guidelines 15061B, slip 3. Louis?
Yes, thank you. Good evening, Mayor, members of the City Council. Louis Tarico, Interim Director of Community Development. The item before you this evening is a request to introduce Ordinance 1303, which would add a new chapter to the San Dimas Municipal Code to regulate the use of transit facilities to ensure that they are used primarily for their transit purposes. I would like to make a note right now and mention that the case number in the staff report is incorrect. The case number currently reads 22-0006, and it should read 23-006. I want to make sure that the correct case number is reflected in the minutes.
Repeat that, please.
Yes, the correct case number should read MCTA 23-0006.
Thank you.
So the purpose of the ordinance is to ensure that transit facilities are readily available and accessible to the public for their intended use and to make sure that they are maintained in a clean, sanitary, and safe condition by the city. As part of the process during this, when we were drafting this ordinance, we did reach out to our neighboring city, the city of Laverne, as they do have a similar ordinance, and they've been successful in maintaining their transit facilities accessible to the public and accessible to city staff so they can maintain them and clean them. It is important to ensure that people using public transportation, especially seniors and those that are disabled, have the ability to access these transit facilities, including benches. Under the proposed ordinance, the transit facility would include shelters, benches at bus stops and train stations, and the area required for boarding and loading of passengers. The ordinance would create hours of operation for these facilities, prohibit the obstruction of these facilities, and create a process by which to remove property from these facilities. The proposed ordinance would prohibit anyone from occupying transit facilities outside of the operating hours, which would be 30 minutes before the first scheduled transit vehicle of the day and until 30 minutes after the last scheduled transit vehicle of the day. So outside of those operating hours, no one can occupy these public facilities. It would also prohibit individuals from storing personal property, camping, or obstructing another person's ability to use the transit facility. Lastly, the ordinance creates standards that allows the city to remove personal property when left behind that is obstructing transit facilities. The removal process would be in compliance with state law and would include noticing, handling, storing, and retrieval requirements. Adoption of this ordinance would assist in ensuring that the entire community has access to these transit facilities, including city staff, to ensure that we are able to maintain them and keep them in a safe and clean and sanitary condition. Transit facilities should be used for their intended purposes, and this ordinance provides the city with the tools to be able to achieve that. That concludes staff's presentations. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Questions? Any?
I do have one. When we're talking about notices that are required to be posted for the removal of property, is this a 72-hour notice, or what kind of time frame from the notice being posted to the time the property is removed?
So the ordinance does allow city staff to, if there's any personal property obstructing the transit facility or the bus stop shelter, we can actually remove it immediately away from the shelter. And then once we went away from there, that we would have to notice it for proper removal.
Perfect.
It does give us the authority to remove it immediately.
Thank you.
And we are actually going to post the hours of the bus transit stop, when the bus starts, not Gold Line, but Foothill Trans. These are our shelters, right? They're not the transit,
They're the city's shelters.
city shelters.
Yes.
So we'll post whatever, I don't know what time buses start, and I don't know what time buses end, but we'll do that. We'll make sure that signage is in place before we start enforcing it.
Yes, so those requirements are not written into the ordinance. Those are more of the practices and internal practices that certainly we can discuss in regards to the proper notification to ensure that people are aware of these hours.
Thank you.
We also want to make sure, we look at reference to when the parks closes, it references a condition, not a specific time, because they change. The bus lines have different start and end times during days of the week and the line that occurs. So we got to be careful. You don't post a time that says this, starts and stops, but then Foothill Transit changes the times on the route, and then you have to change a sign that refers to it. Yeah, I think it comes when we go to enforce the provisions of the ordinance, that we have to validate that in fact there is no operating bus that will be operating within 30 minutes prior to actually doing that enforcement. And so we need to make sure that those who would enforce the code know properly what times those buses are operative.
And this will also include the Gold Line station?
To the extent that they don't authorize people doing otherwise.
And enforcement of this will be done by?
Sheriff's Department with code enforcement.
The only one thing I wonder is we'll have to have some good close contact, because when there are sporting events downtown in LA, the trains, vary their schedule. And so, if SC has a game downtown or UCLA or anywhere, that's going to make it much later than the normal practice of the train, who's going to find that information out?
I think it's a case-by-case basis. If we make a determination, really the conditions we're really worried about is I go sit down on a chair and I take 2 other spaces with my property. So when somebody comes to sit, there's nowhere to sit because I put my property next to me.
Understand?
And therefore, we want to make sure that if we offer 4 spaces for a senior or somebody to sit, that 4 individuals can reasonably sit there and you're not obstructing that with some materials that should not be there.
Understand. At that point, I'll entertain a motion.
I move we approve, read by title and introduce ordinance 1303, approving municipal code text amendment 22-0006.
23.
23, wait, 24. Or 23. What Louis said.
What Louis said.
You know what, as staff recommended with the correction, how about that? Thank you.
Any further questions? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing
Mayor,
none,
we need to
motion.
have a reading. We need to have a reading of the title.
An ordinance of the City Council of the City of San Dimas, County of Los Angeles, California, adding Chapter 12.18 of the San Dimas Municipal Code regulations regulating the use of transit facilities.
I'll move that we waive further reading and introduce.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing none, motion carries 5-0. We'll move on to other business. Number 3, introduce ordinance 1302, approving municipal code amendment 22-0002 to regulate camping and storage of private and public property, and determination of exemption from CEQA under CEQA guidelines 15061B3. Louis, is that the right municipal code amendment?
So on this one, we were consistently incorrect. This one does also should be 23, year 23, so it's 23-0002.
Thank you. Would you like to give us a report?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Again, this ordinance 1302, would add a new chapter to the San Dimas Municipal Code to regulate camping and storage of storage on private and public property. It would establish provisions to ensure that we're able to regulate unlawful camping and unlawful storage of personal property on private and public property. Currently, the city has standards to regulate, prohibit camping in parks, but we don't have any standards that controls it anywhere in the city. This ordinance would address that by expanding the city's authority to mitigate impacts associated with unlawful camping and storage of personal property citywide. Before I get into the merits of the ordinance, I do want to talk about a little bit about homelessness, which is affecting various communities, and it impacts not only the individuals experiencing homelessness, but also the community's public safety and well-being. The city is committed to offering a variety of resources designed to assist individuals experiencing homelessness, as well as those at risk of becoming homeless. Recently, the city entered into agreement with the Los Angeles Center for Drug and Alcohol, known as LACADA, to provide comprehensive services, including street outreach, housing navigation, mental health support, case management, and facilitating access to health care and housing to these individuals. It's also important to note that while the city does provide these services, individuals experiencing homelessness don't have to accept these services. Many times, it will take multiple visits from staff and LACADA staff with these individuals to establish relationships before they actually open up to us and are even willing to consider these services. However, city staff does make every effort to assist these individuals and realize that each situation is unique. With that, the proposed ordinance seeks to regulate unlawful camping. City staff drafted the ordinance with the goal of balancing the needs of the community and the unhoused. It's also important to note that the ordinance is in compliance with the various recent court decisions affecting homelessness. The ordinance would prohibit camping on any public or private property in the city. In situations where there is no shelter or beds available, the ordinance would only prohibit camping in certain prohibited public places and any transit shelter, prohibit camping facilities from being erected between 7 a.m. and sunset, and prohibit individuals from obstructing public areas such as streets, sidewalks, and parks. The prohibited public places will include areas such as any portion along Bonita and Arrow Highway and any public property located within 1,000 feet of Bonita and Arrow. All city-owned facilities, city parks, and county-owned properties. The ordinance would also include prohibitions against obstructing access to sidewalks, streets, and building entrances, and it would make it unlawful to store personal property on any public property. So the ordinance does have prohibitions against individuals sitting or lying in front of entrances to buildings and accesses, so we're able to control that. Similar to the transit facility ordinance, which the council just introduced, this ordinance creates standards for removal of personal property in compliance with state law and will include noticing, handling, storing, and retrieval requirements. Lastly, the ordinance would prohibit anyone from living in motor vehicles anywhere in the city. However, in situations where shelter beds are not available, then this prohibition would only be limited to the prohibited public places that were mentioned earlier. The city will continue to be committed to assisting individuals experiencing homelessness through our existing services, but we also need to establish protocols to mitigate negative impacts associated with unlawful camping and storage of personal property. This ordinance will achieve this. That concludes staff's presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Questions?
The only question I had about this, and I'm in agreement with the entire thing, is sometimes during holidays, somebody might have a visitor that arrives in a motorhome and might want to stay a night or two, or maybe even a week, but a short period of time at the residence, but in their motorhome. So I wonder if we would want to have an exception for that kind of a use, or how that would work.
If I may, Mr. Council Member, while we have many, many ordinances, not just this one, it's the application and enforcement of it that isn't necessarily always black and white. And so we do have to tailor how we approach circumstances and what is occurring at the time. For example, building relationships with individuals that don't want shelter, that we can convince them to get into shelter, or circumstances that we can't consider at this point that are reasonable not to always enforce right away without a warning or some other approach to address. I would be hesitant to just start adding exceptions and changes to the policies, or at least this policy in particular, since we've heavily vetted this currently with the city attorney's office to make sure it fully complies with any case law that's out there.
No, and I completely understand that. What I'm thinking about is there are exceptions called out. For example, somebody who's camping in the backyard temporarily with the family, and that could be for a day, a week, or whatever. There's an exception written into the ordinance for that particular thing. So whereas you couldn't just pitch a tent any place, and you can't do it without permission in somebody's yard, obviously. If somebody were to pull into the driveway and get the permit that we have and all that kind of thing, or in other cases where somebody's having some construction done on the house and wants to. So I'm more comfortable with these exceptions being listed as opposed to remembering that Chris and us and everybody is understanding and, oh yeah, we aren't going to enforce it in that particular situation. That's just my personal thought.
I have to agree with Councilmember Abner. I think as we were kind of sitting here looking at this, my aunt and uncle from Florida drove their motorhome in one Christmas, and got a parking permit and parked in front of the house and, stayed for 3 days during the holiday. And I mean, from what I understand at this point, that would be prohibited. Is that correct? I mean, the way this reads?
Yes, that's correct.
So, I'm inclined to agree that, as much as I'd love to go to the spirit of the law discussion, that doesn't mean that someone from code enforcement's not going to go at 2 or 3 in the morning, tag the RV, and, in the morning, find a nice note and end up being a big headache when that might be something that we're not necessarily opposed to entertaining. If there's a nexus between, the person in the RV and the resident, I wonder if that's a permitting exception that we could look at and, and write in, that captures the spirit of that allowance.
I think I would have to defer to the city attorney, and the intent here is not for temporary habitation, such as what you're calling out. This is for persistent and continuous habitation.
In the example that you're giving, though, I don't know that, maybe I'm wrong and I'm misremembering, but I think the way our ordinance reads now, you're unable to obtain a temporary permit for an RV unless the RV is registered to that location. Or is that possibly a new provision that we've thrown around in planning or something?
No, my understanding is right now, the way it's really currently written, anyone can get a permit to park or RV whatever, for the 3 days, whatever the code allows, so.
Okay.
So currently, the ordinance as written prohibits all sleeping in motorhomes on public and private property temporarily or for a long time. It seems like what Councilmember Ebner and Councilmember Vienna are looking to do is to add an exception or an exemption for sleeping in an RV or motorhome if there is a permit for that RV. And my question, and I think that's completely fine if you wanted to add that exception, just like we have for backyard camping. Councilmember Vienna mentioned on the street. Would you want to have the exception for both in the driveway and on the street, as long as they have a temporary RV parking permit?
Right, but I guess my concern would be, in the example where relative or whatever the case may be is coming from out of town to visit, and they're going to be there for 2 or 3 days, and there's a nexus between the person in the RV and a address, a resident, then I don't have an issue with that. I would have an issue with the issuance of a temporary permit with absolutely zero nexus to a resident or an address or a community member, And the other thing is, just while we're on topic, is, I know Lowe's, just one that comes to mind in the community, and Walmart and Glendora are both places that welcome RVs to be able to temporarily park. And I don't know that I necessarily have any heartburn with that, to be honest with you. I don't know where everyone else is on that.
And
I
this-
think,
This ordinance would prohibit that exact thing.
I'm sure everybody knows from the study session that we had a couple of months ago, I'm extremely pro-RV, but I would be really hesitant to make this exception apply to public property. I would be fine with it on private property, whether it be Lowe's or Walmart or the driveway of a
Right, yeah.
Maybe.
a resident's
And that's what
house.
I'm talking about, is public, privately owned parking lots like Lowe's,
Yeah.
that's accessible to the public and allow that use.
Yeah.
I'm not opposed to that if they
Right.
wish that.
And in your case of relatives coming, probably pulling into the driveway as opposed to being on the street, maybe.
Yeah. Well, they had a pretty large RV, so it wouldn't fit in the driveway, to be honest with you. There's a coach.
Okay, so if the council wanted to do that, we could add an exception to the sleeping in motorhomes prohibition for temporary use of motorhomes for sleeping purposes overnight on private property with the property owner's permission. and with any necessary permit.
Motorhomes or any kind of vehicle?
Motorhomes or any kind of vehicle.
Got it, okay.
Well, or actually, we could limit it to only motorhomes.
I would feel more comfortable.
I would
with-
oppose that for this reason. So in the case of like Lowe's and Walmart, you have a lot of people who are van dwellers, right? They're not necessarily homeless, but they could be millennials, for example, or Gen Z who are driving around. Sometimes they prefer van life or even whatever car they're in. And so if you start limiting it just to one type of vehicle, especially if it's in the spirit of the property owner granting permission, I think that that just doesn't really feel like it's in the spirit of what Walmart and Lowe's and other centers want to do.
You're saying they use smaller vehicles, like
Yeah, so I don't know if you saw the
van
movie,
type of vehicle?
like Nomadland is a great example, where you have a large population of sometimes even seniors who decide to sell everything, they're living out of their van, right? They're driving around, they're filling odd jobs here and there, especially some of them may even be out here to work at the the warehouse facilities and everything else in Pomona and other places. So I think that if you limit it just to RVs, that's a smaller percentage of the people that are doing that. And so in the spirit of what Lowe's and Walmart are doing are to give people, because otherwise they're parking illegally, right? So the whole intent behind that is to say, let's create kind of a safe place for them to park their cars. They want to sleep in dignity in their vehicles. And so limiting it just to RVs, I think, is not in the spirit of the overall nomad lifestyle.
So perhaps, and I guess maybe I'll digress a little bit. So perhaps only maybe granting an exception to the private property, public space use, and see how this goes as it relates to the language for residential, and see if we have an enforcement issue. If we do, we call back the ordinance, because I would hope the spirit of enforcement as it relates to residents who are going to have family visiting from out of town during the holiday, and we don't even generally have parking enforcement during those holiday times through the moratorium, may solve that use case. And to what Nakano's talking about, I do think that there is a population that visit those places, and whether they're transient through our community or they're here for an odd job, I wouldn't want to prohibit that on private property that's publicly accessible.
I think there's also an opportunity coming up for us to discuss what an RV is. When we have the substantive RV discussion, that issue of what is an RV and what is it that we define as a recreational vehicle. I mean, and you're right, there is a proliferation of converted vans and things like that that are functionally RVs that people are using for habitation. So maybe that's something that we need to look at as part of that as well.
And the other thing is that we need to remember, visitors don't only come at holiday time. Okay?
Right.
They come anytime,
Days.
visitors have a right to come anytime, so I don't know exactly where we're going and what we want to do. I understand what we're trying to do, but I think it's a little more complicated than we're talking.
Yeah, is there like in terms of review, so a resident has a relative from out of town and, hey, city, what the heck? They just came in to be here for this. Is that a review or an appeal that could be handled among staff with discretion, or is that going to be a full-on hearing process?
Generally, you're going to see these be complaint-driven, which is how code enforcement operates. So we're not driving around town trying to find RVs and trying to ascertain is somebody actually living in it.
Not the guy that
Well, what do
tags
you-
my car at 3 in the morning.
And so,
Okay, let me ask a question then. We have parking control 7 days a week from 2 to 5 in the morning, okay? When they're driving around, they're not waiting for somebody to call and complain about, hey, by the way, this van's parked over here. They're doing it by obs, right?
Yeah.
yeah, but we're talking about the overnight parking permit, and so a car that's properly, or vehicle or RV properly parked with a permit, we're not stopping and then going to the door and trying to say, excuse me, is somebody living here in this RV that's properly permitted and parked? And so what I could see is what the city attorney talked, that under section 840.050B, where it's, the section does not apply to vehicles that are lawfully parked in an authorized trailer court or campsite with the city, we could expand that to include any private property that's parked with appropriate permits and with owner's permission, just to make sure that if you're parked appropriately on that private property, it's exempted. And then we could reassess and determine, does that adequately address the concerns of folks that are there, knowing that code enforcement will be enforcing not in a strict, and not in a proactive basis whether occupancies occurred, but in a complaint-driven basis, and then we could ascertain, do we need to make a change?
I think that's the simplest approach, just exemption for private property.
I would also
With the
like to
owner's
make a,
permission.
if I can make a note as well. So we wrestled with this, right, for this particular reason. And if we're going to move forward with some language that's going to be temporary, I think it's probably wise if we define temporary when it comes to these situations, because it could easily turn into a situation where someone might have multiple visitors throughout the year, throughout the month, and they say, well, they're here temporary. So that's something that you can encounter as well.
They still have to comply with the RV ordinance and the permitting required. So that doesn't exempt, this doesn't exempt it. I think the issue is, somebody comes over, it's not just this ordinance that applies, it's also the permitting for RV. And so how long can I park it on the street, for example?
Right.
I'm limited. And so to the extent you're saying somebody's coming for 2 weeks, that's a policy question for the council. Do you allow an RV parked for 2 weeks on the public street occupied? No. So I think then we don't need to really discuss changing the ordinance to reflect that.
Right.
And so I think what we really want to define is the conditions that you mentioned, the exceptions, where I want to allow somebody to park legally with the permits that the city offers, and they just happen to have to reside there temporarily with my permission on the property, that should that be okay or not? And under this ordinance, it would be, no, it's not okay to live in there. Well, what the council's saying is, we want to allow that. And then we can reassess, did that adequately address the concern? Or do we need to tweak the ordinance a little further to make sure we allow for some of that?
Well, I think that
Occupancy.
the consensus was that let's move forward with the private exception, because we have all these use cases, and this is just us spitballing with really not a lot of time to think about this, right? There's probably many other cases we haven't thought about that could make this problematic if it were to move forward. So Ryan's suggestion, which is to move forward with the private exception, and if we see problems that arise that still need to be addressed, we can always come back to this and look at it and tighten it or tweak it or refine it in some way. That to me seems like the most comfortable approach. I think we're trying to develop a policy that may potentially cause more harm than good. And so I'm of the belief that let's move forward, see if this addresses the concern. If it doesn't, then you tighten a little bit more until you get to where you want it to be.
And would you have any, that sounds good. Would you have anything in there about temporary? Lewis was wondering about a
Even that, I
definition.
feel like it's hard to define temporary, right?
Right, I mean,
And
do you
so
say a
think that
week?
even
Do you
that
say-
would just, for now, we can always come back to it, but trying to come up with temporary, what that could mean, if you have it in the van life, for example, if somebody is doing seasonal work at the Amazon warehouses or packing, that temporary may be a little bit longer than somebody just visiting for Christmas or something like that. So that's why I struggle a little bit in terms of defining what temporary is. I feel like we can get a better handle on it moving forward with an ordinance with an exception. We can see if there is abuses or problems that arise, and then we can come up with a better idea of what temporary could be.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, Cousin Eddie coming over for the holidays for a short while is a little bit different than the uses that you're talking about. And I don't know how much in the community that we actually see that, the actual person coming, and through the various times of years like the mayor talked about. So I would, just to be clear, so we're talking about the exception, private property,
Like a Lowe's, like a.
commercial use
Exactly,
private
yep.
property, leave the rest of it as is, and then we'll adjust it if we need to?
That's right.
Okay, so I would then,
So is it not then a driveway?
no, leave the residential. The only exception for now then would be commercial use private property that's open to the public and wishes to allow that use. And then we look at how the city enforces the private property residential aspect of this. And if it becomes problematic, we call back the ordinance and adjust.
If I may propose the language, and then you can tell me how we can tweak it, can I do that?
I was going to, but sure. Go ahead.
So under that subsection B, it could be this section does not apply to vehicles that are lawfully parked in an authorized trailer court, a campsite within the city, nor on private property when owner's permission is provided and in accordance to law and regulation.
Well, I guess the question would be, so you would address John's concern, because that sounds broad enough to apply to, there's no differentiation between public and private property, right? So,
Between residential and commercial.
I'm sorry, yeah, commercial, residential, commercial. Are you good with that?
I am good with what he said. I like that because
Okay.
I would move
Bill and Mary
we,
and the kids show up, let them park in the driveway.
we read by title and introduce ordinance 1302, approving municipal code text amendment 23002 to amend title 8 of the municipal code with the addition of the language as just cited by the city manager.
Second.
Any further questions, any further comments? All in favor?
Aye.
We need to have a reading of the
Reading.
title.
An ordinance of the City Council of the City of San Dimas, County of Los Angeles, California, adding Chapter 8.40 of the San Dimas Municipal Code, regulating camping and storage of personal property on private and public property.
I would move we waive further reading and introduce ordinance 1302.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing none, motion carries 5-0. We'll move on to oral communications. Members of the audience, speakers are limited to 3 minutes, or as may be determined by the chair. Any speakers? Margie Green?
I just wanted to pass on to those in the city that remember Don Rosen. He passed away yesterday at the age of about 90. Don never lived in town, but he did so much for San Dimas. Just a few of the things. He owned industrial hydrocarbon, and he was also past chairman of the board for the chamber. He did so much there. He also had hired David Dreyer, our congressman, for many years when he was a young man in college. And later, David Dreyer was one that helped get $1 million or close to that for the Walker House. Don was very instrumental in getting the Festival of Arts started and sticking with it for all these years. He just was such a worker and did so much around town. On industrial hydrocarbon property, the Martin House was. And it was in the way, so he took it upon himself. He and his wife donated that, from what I understand, to the city of San Dimas, and the city did move it over to where it is now, and it is our Chamber of Commerce. So Don did so much around town. He also redid and fixed up the Near building, which is the building on Monte Vista and Bonita. He was just so instrumental with things around. And if you look at a lot of the paintings that are here in City Hall, it'll say donated by Don and Sharon Rosen. As I say, they never lived in town, but they certainly did donate a lot. They did a lot. As I say, when he hired David Dreyer right in college, it gave David Dreyer a chance to go out and campaign and do his thing to where he got in the future and where he got to be able to give back to the city of San Dimas. David Dreyer did live here while he was Congress. And there were just so many things. It's hard to imagine all the things that Don Rosen did. He was 90 years old, and he did just so very, very much, and I wanted to pass that on to those of you that do remember him. He'd been in poor health for quite a while, but what a wonderful person, and leaves a good legacy for our town. Thank you.
Thank you, Margie.
Anyone else wishing to speak to the council at this time? Ms. Levant, Mrs. Levant.
Thank you so much. I wanted to speak to all of you in regards to the discussion on the last ordinance 1302. So we do have a certain number of residential properties that do not have access to a driveway and/or their public property is city property. So that street on Cypress where vehicles park, they receive parking permits because their public property is city property. Unfortunately, if I'm not mistaken, this ordinance would basically say that if you sleep outside, grandma decides to bring their Winnebago per se. I thought that was funny. There, then park in front, that they would now be in violation of the spirit of this code. And in my neighborhood, they are going to get ticketed if they do not have a permit. That would also be true for several other residences too in the city of San Dimas, because they're not, in addition to that, they're not allowed to have a driveway either. We're not permitted to have a driveway. So if you cannot fit your vehicle in the back of your garage and you're not permitted to have a driveway, then you have to be permitted to park on the street. But if parking on the street isn't private property, then now you've been permitted to park on a street which is public property which now belongs to the city. It's not private because it doesn't belong to you. So that does present a quandary in essence with the ordinance, which is the topic of discussion. So perhaps maybe that portion should be flushed out just a little bit as a corresponds to residences. I'm not really sure what you could do about that per se. You could register a particular vehicle to a residence. So for instance, I myself am registering this vehicle on behalf of 933 Cypress Street. Thereby, that would now make the owner atonable to the action of the vehicle itself. By doing that, now it's the owner of the resident who is now responsible for the vehicle. So if it stays there for 2 weeks and someone camps out in it, you can then come knocking on their door. I don't know how residents would like that, but I myself would much rather have that done to me than having my mother or my father-in-law responsible for the parking ticket. Thank you so much.
Okay, any further? Okay, seeing none, we'll move on to city reports. City manager.
No report tonight.
Okay, city attorney.
I also have no report, Mayor.
Okay. Members of the council members' reports on meetings attended at the expense of a local agency pursuant to AB 1234, GC 232D. Any meetings attended? Seeing none, we'll move on to city council requests and future items, comments, and updates. Mr. Nakano.
Sure, Mr. Mayor, I would request that if we, the points that Ms. Luvand raised, is it possible to see if the points that she raised would in fact cause the issues that she had cited in her comments? So that would be something that I would just kind of want a response so that we could analyze the ordinance in relation to the points that she had raised. Additionally, I just also wanted to wish everybody a Happy New Year. I'm looking forward to productive 2024. It's been a pleasure working with all of you. This will be the final months of me working with Councilman Ebner, so I'm looking forward to getting to know you further still, and certainly going to miss the questions and the insights that you bring. And with that, those are all my comments and requests at this time. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Ryan?
I was
That's
just,
good. Thank you.
I actually, other than what Councilmember Nakano brought up, I actually was going to say I don't have anything, but did you want to call back that item?
I think before so Ms. Luvand had raised some points that I don't really know if, what the impact is based on the ordinance. And so I think what I'm looking for is some sort of a response to that.
I would move that we call back other business item number 3 for further discussion.
I'm in favor of that. Thank you.
Okay.
And are you talking about right now?
Right now?
That'd be good. Yeah, get
So
it done.
if you're looking, we're going to have to vote again. So you want to make a motion for reconsideration of the item, and then that'll
Right.
pass,
And potentially take no further action after that, but we'll see.
potentially.
So, Mr. Mayor, there's a motion to reconsider by Councilmember Vienna and a second by Councilmember Nakano, and if a vote of 5-0 will allow us to reopen that.
Any further questions? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Seeing none, motion carries 5-0. We'll reopen the,
So I understand the issue, because there are a lot of houses that don't have driveways big enough or don't have driveways at all. And the way things are going with the densification of various single-family zones, it may become more and more of a problem. I think this is where, so I'm not opposed in concept to the idea. However, this is where we really need to put that word temporary with a definition in, because people sleeping in campers and RVs is exactly the thing we don't want to be happening all over the city, just on public streets.
I'd like to hear staff's response to the original question.
Yeah.
So there are going to be differences in application. If we go under the presumption that every home should be treated exactly the same, we already have disparities. You know, an ADU, I mean, there's parking that you can't require on certain ADUs, in which case they're eligible for on-street parking permits from the first vehicle, where a homeowner with a garage, you need to have more than enough vehicles to be put both in the garage and on the driveway before you would be eligible in the street. And so it's property per property specific. It's really the council's call whether you want to allow folks to be able to live in RVs and in what manner you want them to live. And so if we want to be a permissive community that allows folks to be able to live on public streets for some period of time, temporary or long-term, however that's defined, that is a call that the council is making. The real crux of what we're trying to accomplish here is we don't want longer-term chronic habitation in an RV. We have hotels and motels, and we have homes that you could be a guest in. And if you have a visitor that comes and parks in compliance or as defined in some limited fashion, if that's what you want to do on the public right of way, you could do that. But the problem right now is not that we're having a widespread number of folks that are coming to visit us and living on the streets. It's that folks are attempting to try to habitate for a long period of time in an RV or a vehicle that isn't intended to do so. And so I think the change we made has opened up private property, and there is the example that was brought up like Lowe's or how Walmart or others provide. They do offer opportunities for folks to be able to live on their property, and if the owner allows it and it complies with any of the rules or laws, it's allowable. If I happen to have a home that does not allow me to put an RV on the private property in compliance with code, then I need to find an alternative like a campsite or somewhere that RV needs to go, or I need to consider going to a hotel, unless the council changes this policy and says, we want broadly to allow folks to be able to come visit, live for some duration of time longer than a very temporary.
So just to make sure I understand then, to the point that she raised. So basically, in situations wherein there's not a private property of a resident to allow it, like in the instance of Cypress, as she was discussing, nothing precludes that person from going to a place like Lowe's or whatever the case may be to be able to do what they're looking to do, perhaps. But where it's permissible that somebody has the frontage or the property to be able to allow that, then we've made that permissible.
Correct, and we also have to note that there is the provision that we cannot enforce the code if no other options exist for that person. I think the question is going to come down to if grandma comes and wants to live in the RV in front of the home so she's not paying $150 at the motel, does she have an option? And in that case, I would say yes, she does. So if somebody complains that somebody is habitating that property and code enforcement goes out and then goes to enforce, there would be an alternative for that person to derive if they're on the public space.
I am in full agreement with Chris that that this is not necessarily something that we want, and with John, that we don't want this happening all over the city, specifically in public streets. Carving out the specific exception, which is what we just did, I honestly had a little bit of heartburn with. And again, this is coming from a place where I'm extremely pro-RV. But as soon as you start permitting any habitation of RVs on streets, you're going to start running into issues such as sewage facilities. Where are they going to dump sewage if there's no, if you're camping in the street in front of somebody's house, there's probably not facilities, even within a halfway decent-sized radius, for you to dispose of waste. There'll be hoses strung across sidewalks. There'll be electric cords strung across sidewalks, and it'll create a situation that becomes something way more intensive than what we're imagining in our heads. So that's my, looking at it even from a very pro-RV and very understanding perspective, that I cannot wrap my head around at all, allowing any use in public streets. I'm okay trying it out on private property for the time being, but I'm even I have some trepidation about that, only because I know how much just temporarily storing an RV, prepping it for a trip in somebody's front yard, can create issues in the city. So my gut feeling says, if it's behind your fence somewhere where it can be stored completely out of public view, and you can have the facilities such as sewer, electric, and water, and somebody wants to come visit, then by all means, it's your private property and you should be entitled to do that. But I even have some heartburn about the driveway, but I'm willing to give this a shot the way we have it right now, the way we just approved it, and see how it goes. And maybe it won't be an issue, and maybe it will, but I would, right now, I'm kind of uncomfortable even the way we passed it.
So Eric, I'm in agreement with you. I think nobody wants to see San Dimas turn into Venice. We don't want to see broken down RVs littering our streets. But I think that the main point is that there could be a lot of use cases that we haven't necessarily thought about that this could have unintended consequences. So in the example that was raised where people don't have driveways and they are not permitted to have driveways and they have people visit, it could very well be that we have a lot of people getting tickets because they just aren't able to do the same things that someone with a driveway is able to do. And are we fully prepared and aware of the consequences of that could happen? And so I think that all five of us, if I'm reading this correctly, want to put forward an ordinance. I just think we probably want a little bit more discussion around some of those use cases so we know fully what we're getting into before we pull the trigger.
Can I respond to that, Councilmember?
Yeah.
So we already have on the book the rules of how RVs can be parked and stored on public and private space, so that doesn't change. The difference with this ordinance is habitation, and when habitation could be allowed versus not allowed. And so when we introduce into the conversation, well, I don't have private property on my property to do the things that Councilmember Weber may have at his house, how is this going to apply to that? That's a different ordinance that applies to how do I properly store an RV, not whether you should be able to live in the RV for an extended period of time. And then the second issue, we also have to understand that we have California building code that applies to our buildings. And so occupancy in a home is a pretty large number of the number of people you can put in the home. So when I, with a 2-bedroom condo, had 12 people at my house for 2 nights because guests were coming over to stay with me, that was my choice. And while somebody else may want them to come over but stay in an RV, that is a choice, and we do have options. You're making the call as to whether you want that livability to occur now on the public street or on the private property. And on the private property, we're saying yes, when you have such property and that RV or vehicle can be parked legally there. We're not changing the criteria on how an RV could be parked.
Yeah, I hear your consternation, Eric Weber, and I'm not in disagreement. Even with the private property use case. But to the point the city manager just raised, I don't think, we're not changing anything, after listening to this. It's easy to get sucked down the rabbit's hole, but realistically, it's back to habitation on public streets, and we've generally said no across the board is what we've said. So I think we should pilot this ordinance, see how it goes. If we need to call it back later, we'll do that and make adjustments. I would move that we take no further action on this item and leave the previously past action in place and see how it goes.
Well, if you want the ordinance to go forward, to be adopted, you have to vote again to introduce it.
I'll move.
Read the title.
So what I might ask is, just because there's been a lot of back and forth, can we add it to the meeting agenda for next week? And that way we can have a private conversation with Ms. Luvand and explore this a little bit more, since,
It will be coming as a second reading at the next meeting.
Oh, I
And we
see.
can have the conversation.
Got it, okay.
And if there's then a change to the ordinance then and it's substantive, we may have to then reintroduce the ordinance and then.
got
will
it,
come
okay,
again.
okay.
If I could just add before we finish this item up. While properties do have some amenities that other properties don't, the one thing that the community does have is an amenity, which is Benelli Bluffs RV Park, which it's beautiful. I know people that come from well out of the area to come stay in San Dimas at Benelli Bluffs. So in that case where somebody from out of town is visiting and I don't have a driveway or what have you, there is an amenity that's open to the public, that's cheaper than a hotel, that allows a beautiful setting that's not in a street. I try to frame this as understanding as possible, but I think there's the appropriate place to even for a few days, a week, 2 weeks, to habitate in an RV. And, like I said, I'm kind of on shaky ground myself here, but, I think that would be the more preferred or appropriate place in my mind for that type of use case.
All right, I would move we introduce ordinance 1302, approving municipal code text amendment 23002 to regulate camping, storage on private property with the, on private and public property with the exceptions in language as stated by the city manager, who is going to state them.
In section 8.40.050B, the section shall read, "This section does not apply to vehicles that are lawfully parked in an authorized trailer court, comma, campsite within the city, comma, nor on private property when owner's permission is provided and when done so in accordance to law and regulation."
Thank you.
Should that be nor or? I think should that be nor or?
I think it reads the same either way. I don't think it matters.
Okay, fine. And I'll second.
Thank you.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Oh, you got to do the ordinance, reading of the ordinance. Again.
I might call it back one more time, too.
Oh, yeah, you haven't heard what I'm going to say.
Oh, God.
Ordinance 1302, approving municipal code text amendment. Am I reading the right one? 23-003, to amend Title 8 of the San Dimas Municipal Code by adding a new chapter, Chapter 8.40, to regulate camping and storage on private and public property and determine the ordinance is exempt from CEQA. That's a little different.
It was 23-0002, correct?
Yes.
Okay, I would move that we waive further reading and introduce 1302.
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, motion carries for the second time, 5-0.
All right, and with that, I have no further comments. Thank you, Mayor.
John?
Happy New Year, everybody, and that's it.
Eric Weber?
Well, I appreciate calling that item back, actually, because I was going to address Ms. Luvand's concerns in my council member comments, and it's definitely the more appropriate thing to do to call it back. So I appreciate that. But that means that I only have to say Happy New Year to everybody, and I look forward to seeing everybody at the Candidates Forum here coming up in a couple of weeks. That's it. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, can I say something?
Sure.
Happy New Year, everybody. I just didn't want to be left out. Thank you.
Anything else? No. So I don't forget, Happy New Year. I don't have much to say. I just wanted to point out, this last weekend I had an opportunity to go to one of our local restaurants, and I was very pleasantly surprised to see a very beaming, smiling, happy Hattie from Sweet Savory, who had just been notified that she was one of top 20 restaurants in LA County, according to Yelp. And so she was pretty excited about that. And I'm looking at the list of the other restaurants, and we got the best. So I just want to say congratulations to Sweet Savory. You know, she's making good on her word of trying to be the best in the county. So congratulations, Hattie. And if anybody has eaten there, I know lots of our staff have, and it's one of their favorite places. So, but with that, hey, Happy New Year. And we're gonna, okay, at this point, are you gonna bring up, make an announcement about the closed session?
I don't have a particular announcement, but we are going to go into closed session for an existing litigation matter.
Okay. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. We're adjourned. See you guys in 2 weeks.